Okay, in Unreal, whenever you're inside your folder, if you right-click in this empty space inside of the content browser, you should see FX. So, and then we just created an emitter. We'll want to also create a Niagara system. Name that WVGDE system. And then we're also going to right-click and add a module script. So a Niagara module script. So we should have a module, an emitter, and a system. We're going to go ahead and open up the emitter by double-clicking on it, and it should open up a new window. And then you can just click and drag that tab into the top. It'll put it there. That way we can switch back and forth easily. Double-click, open up the module, and then double-click and open up the system. And we're going to go back into the selected emitters, and right now we can see the attributes of our emitter. There's a couple things that I'm going to get rid of right off the bat. This add velocity, this is what's making the particles shoot up before they start falling down. I'm going to delete that because the thing that we're doing isn't going to use it. We're going to add our own velocity later on. So under particle spawn, it's the green section. Okay, so it looks like particle spawn. It's over to the right under selected emitters, particle spawn. And then there is add velocity, and there's this little symbol of a trash can. Go ahead and click that trash can, and you can see it deleted that. So now over here in the viewport, you can see that since our particles don't have an emitter, they're just kind of falling. We're also going to come down here to this acceleration force, and we're going to delete that because we're going to add our own force over time. So spawn rate up here, let's leave that for now. Underneath emitter update, so it's in the orange section, it should be the third from the top. There's a plus sign next to that. Add that, and if you just start typing burst, you'll see a spawn burst instantaneous, and that's actually what we want. We'll go ahead and hit enter on that, and then you can see that we now have a spawn burst instantaneous. Spawn count, I'm going to go ahead and turn that up to 1,000 just for testing. So now up at the top left you should see save, apply, and compile. Go ahead and hit compile, apply, and save just to be safe. And then we're going to go back into the system, which is the red item that we made that you guys should have. And I'm going to go into that window. At the beginning of the session, whenever we right-clicked and made the system down at the bottom, you should have a red item in your content browser. If you just double-click that, it will also open the window, if you haven't already opened the window. Okay, you can see that there's nothing here. So down here, we have some time. If anyone is stuck and need help, wave us down. Say something. Don't suffer in silence. My man back there needs some help. So I'm just going to add this to the track, just this last step, so we can be finished with my notes here. If we go to track, this is a sequencer timeline. We'll get into that. But we want to track emitter. And I'm going to search for WVGDE emitter. I'm going to select that. You can see I've added it to the timeline. I'm going to back up, and now you can see our emitter inside of the system. And you can kind of see where this would go, where if you have a particle system where you might have multiple emitters, this will track those emitters. So your system could be made up of multiple emitters. All right. So now that we have this in our system, there you go, notes. We're going to go back into the emitter. Underneath parameters, you should have a parameters tab. I'm going to make mine a little larger so you can see it. Underneath the parameters tab, we're going to click the little triangle next to particles and drop that down. And you should see all these attributes. They're the parameters that these things over here are using. And we want to create one. To get that effect of all these particles spawning around a mesh, we need to get a mesh. So I'm going to hit plus. It'll bring up a search menu for the different kinds of parameters. And I'm just going to type in mesh. And you see skeletal mesh and static mesh. I think for this one, we're going to use a skeletal mesh, because that's the first one I looked at. It'll bring up and ask you to rename this. This part is going to be important because this is how we reference this parameter in code. So we're gonna want to name this something that is pretty simple. So just for the purposes of this workshop, it's going to be particles.mesh, capital M. So now we have particles.mesh. Okay, now over here on the right side, minimize that. Over here on the right side, you should see set variables. We were here before. I'm going to click and drag that particle mesh, and you see that the set variables turns green, and that means that we can place this here. Hover over where it turns green, and let go. And now you can see inside of the variables we have a reference to that mesh. So inside of here, now we have a default mesh. I'm just going to go ahead and search. Actually, you can probably scroll through here and find a good one. The best one I'm going to say would probably be this box, just so we absolutely know for sure if it's working later. And it'll come up and say CPU access error. That says fix now. Go ahead and hit fix now. All it's doing is that these have to be in a certain order whenever they're called. You can see that it just rearranged itself. They actually have to be in a particular order. So now we have the mesh in here. We don't always, it's good practice, at least for right now, to come back over into parameters under particles. Act like you're going to go rename that parameter, but just copy it. So we set the variable, and now we're going to go into the module. So there's a little plus sign right here, and when we're searching, we're just asking, like, what are we looking for? And we're looking for a skeletal mesh. So we'll type in skeletal mesh. And then underneath, it's going to be particles make new skeletal mesh. And you can see where it comes up and says particles.new variable. And this is why we wanted to save the name of that. So his is going to be mesh 1. Ours is going to be particles.mesh. And his is going to be mesh 1. There's a couple other things we're going to do. So I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to click and drag and select these with the selection box and then move them over to the right. And then outside of this pin next to particles.mesh, I'm going to click off of this pin, let go, and I'm going to search for random try coordinate. And what this is going to do is just get a random coordinate on a triangle of this mesh.
What was the mesh called?
We did ours particles.mesh. To click off of this node and then like click and drag off of it, and then I search for random try coord.
Okay.
We're also going to click and drag off of that same pin. Let go. It'll bring up the search again. And we want to get position WS, get try position WS. So after I get the try position world space off of the mesh, I'm going to bring it over here and I'm going to tie these coordinates together. And then over here on the map set node to the right, I'm going to hit the plus and I'm just going to start typing particles position. And now you can see it's looking for a vector 3. And then I'm going to go from this position node to this position node. Over here in the left-hand side in the details, where it says mixed flags, we want to uncheck all of them but particle spawn script. And then in category, I'm going to click inside that box and do WVGDE. And that'll just make it easier to search for later. So now, compile, apply, save. So if you guys are finished with this part, I'm going to go back into the emitter. And under particle spawn, so in this green section down here, I'm going to search for WVGDE. And then select whatever you named your modular script. And you can see now what those nodes were doing. It's getting a random coordinate on the surface of that mesh and then spawning a particle there. Okay, there's one thing that we're going to kind of add in here real quick, and then it'll make the pieces come together a little more. In particle update, so the bottom of the green section, particle update plus, I'm going to do a curl noise force. A curl noise force. So in particle update, we're going to add a curl noise force. Add to it just to make it a little prettier. Underneath particle update, you have a parameter called color, or a variable color. And then you see this gradient. Somewhere on that gradient, if you click on the top right above that gradient, it'll add another color to it. So I'm going to add blue. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add a yellow. I'm going to add red. And then green. So underneath particle update color, and then you can output colors. Make it do different things. Just work it all. Alright. So there's something else we can do over in the emitter. In the curl force noise. If we wanted to add a parameter that is a float from curve. This thing is snapping all over the place. We can actually add if this snaps away from this one more time, I'm not doing it. Okay. So if you, I'll just tell you guys how to do it. If you come down here to the curl noise force, and there's this little drop down arrow, we can actually select the strength for that and do, if you just start typing in float, there's a float from curve, and then you could, I'm just going to open up another one. And what you should get is this this timeline curve where you can actually set it to where it won't disperse for a little while.
That's just the name. That should just be the name of the category.